Zach Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and I want to thank all of the expert moderators and panelists for being a part of these Insight Jam discussions today. The launch of InsightJam.com has been incredibly rewarding with all of the contributions we're receiving from the experts, solution providers, and end users. It's really been quite a sight to see. If you haven't joined InsightJam.com already, please do. And if you have, please invite some of your colleagues to join as well. And again, thanks very much for being here and enjoy today's discussions.
Solutions Review presents Insight Jam, a social media community for enterprise technology. Hello and welcome back to Insight Jam Live, our Q2 mini jam. My name is Jonathan Paula. I'm the Director of Multimedia and Events here at Solutions Review. And I'm excited to welcome in our next group of experts from around the country as they discuss AI governance, ethics, privacy, and trust. We have Tom Gaurav, Tender, Matt, Roy, and Stephen from Contoral, Informatica, Startree, LogicGate. Roy's retired, and Stephen is from Big ID. Gentlemen, thank you one and all for being here. It is a pleasure to host you for this next hour as we discuss AI governance. I'm going to start off with some introductions. We'll let our moderator, Tom, go first. 30 seconds or less. Just tell the audience a bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tom Mile. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Contoral. We are a consulting group that focuses on artificial intelligence governance, information governance, privacy, consulting. We help organizations stand up programs on governing the data that you have.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And next up, let's go over to Gaurav. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. This is Gaurav Pathak, Vice President of Product Management. I lead metadata management and AI capabilities here at Informatica. Have been with Informatica for 11 years, and then before that, 10 years with Oracle. So I've spent all of my life in data space.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And over to Jitender. Welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan, for having me here. And hello, everyone. My name is Jitender Aswani. I lead engineering here at Startree. Startree is a real-time data analytics platform based on an open source project called Apache Pinot. We are a 4-year-old company, and now we're building some amazing technology to power Gen AI solutions.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Over to Matt.
Hey, Jonathan, and hey, audience. Excited for the conversation today. My name is Matt Kunkel. I'm one of the founders and the CEO here at LogicGate. My background is I have over 20 years of experience in building custom and products around the governance, risk, and compliance space for compliance professionals, security professionals, risk, privacy, so all things holistic GRC. So excited about to talk about AI and how to govern AI and the future of AI today.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Glad to have you here. Roy, how about you?
Hi, everybody. I'm Roy Wilsker. First of all, a little bit of apology. I'm coming down with a cold, so I apologize for any frogginess here. For many years, I worked as an IT leader at Medtronic, a very large medical device company. For the last few years, my role has been to lead efforts to help the company make use of advanced technologies and data science. Most recently, I was one of the core authors for Medtronic's AI Compass. That's the high-level guidance on how the company would do responsible use of artificial intelligence. So I'm very pleased to be here today, and I'm really excited to be on this panel.
Excited to have you here as well. Thank you for joining. And last but not least, Stephen.
Hi, first off, thanks for having me. Really appreciate the invite. Stephen Gatchell, Senior Director of Data Advisory at Big ID. Prior to joining Big ID, my role was really creating data strategies and implementations for large-scale companies. So AI is something that I've been doing for a while, and it's truly excited for this panel and learn from them as well as the audience. So thank you for having me.
Right on. Thank you again. Well, with that, I'm going to step out of the way and let Tom take things over with our opening remarks and the first question. Good luck on the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. And hi again, everybody. I don't know about any of you out there, but we are seeing a lot in our field of organizations racing for a competitive advantage with generative AI tools. They're beginning to experiment and even roll out AI tools to their employees, to their customers. They may be using third-party AI tools. But what we're not seeing we're not seeing very many of these same companies do, is taking a step back and considering how that artificial intelligence needs to be governed, how governance needs to be managed in the enterprise, which we do a lot of information governance work. It's not a lot different from how companies really only started talking about information governance after they were drowning in documents and data. And so I'm really glad that we have this session to talk about governance, because we feel like that this should be a chance to be proactive and actually create and develop some governance around your use of artificial intelligence in the organization. So we've got some great experts today. First question, I think that the first one really is, what do you all see as the essential components of an effective AI governance framework? Let's talk about what makes up a framework for an AI governance program. And do you have any examples of how this might already be working in an organization, or is it still early days for that? I'll start with Gaurav.
Thank you, Tom. We believe at Informatica that the foundation of AI governance should be data governance. Being able to understand what is the data that's going into your AI is very, very important. If it contains bad quality information, if it contains sensitive private information about your customers, about your employees, AI will get to know about it and will spew that out, either hallucinating on some question or when asked directly about it. So it's very, very important that that foundation of data governance is built. Now, beyond that data governance foundation, AI has special requirements, things like model discovery, allowing end users to figure out what are the right models to use within the enterprise, and which of them are the right ones to use for my use case. Because believe it or not, everybody, like you said at the beginning, every executive is behind folks in R&D to create new generative AI applications. Once these applications are out there, the first question that your end customers will ask is what models were used, what are the AI governance practices at this organization, and that kind of trust and transparency is built through thinking about these AI governance frameworks right at the beginning. So model discovery, finding what's the right model, being able to consume the right models and document them, saying that these are the models that I'm using, these are the use cases for which we are using them, will go a long way once this application, generative AI application, becomes goes in production.
Jitendra, does that all ring true with you? Anything you'd want to add to that, or other components?
It does, Tom. Thank you, Gaurav. I was wondering what's the best way to answer that question. So I said, okay, why is the governance framework critical? Why is it important? It's such a timely topic, as you mentioned earlier. So there are 5 things that come to my head. Is that any AI solution that we build, the first and foremost, can that solution be very transparent? Can it talk about how it operates? Can it talk about how it makes decisions? Can it talks about the sources of data it has been trained on? So with transparency, we build a trust. And of course, if you have a trust in the system, you can start to imagine how you can put a governance framework around it. The 4 other things that came to my head when I was thinking about AI governance framework was around ethical use. And we have all have seen in the last 10 years how machine learning systems and following machine learning systems, deep learning systems, we have seen systematic biases being introduced in those systems. So that's another critical element when we think about AI governance. The next speed is accountability. If an AI system makes mistakes, who's held accountable? The lower layer in the AI system, that's the large language models, or the application provider, or the solution provider, or the data provider. So some clear boundaries around who's accountable for system making bad decisions. And then, of course, compliance. I mean, we have seen very little on compliance just yet. There's a lot of chatter around this, but I think at some point we have to understand that these systems need to comply with local rules and regulation. And data governance is a very old, time-tested topic. It also plays a very critical role in AI governance. And the last topic in our head is risk management. If there is some major risk associated with this system, who's again responsible? How will we manage the risk? Can we ask questions around risk management in our AI systems? So those are the 5 main dimensions when I was thinking about AI governance framework. I have to think about transparency, ethical use, accountability, compliance, and risk management.
Well, I think you perfectly teed up the questions to be coming. Matt, are there any other things you'd like to add?
I think, Jitendra hit it on the head. And to me, it's really two things. One is what we're seeing from our customers and clients is it's the wild, wild west in AI, right? And no one knows what models are being used, where we're using AI, whether it's in our products or whether it's to drive efficiencies within the organizations, or it's locked down, right? And both of those are bad, right? We have to have, everyone knows that AI is the future. Every company will be an AI company in the future. So we have to be able to adopt this, but we have to be able to adopt it in a safe, meaningful way. And from my perspective, it starts with understanding where AI is within an organization. That's really kind of, we can talk about the data and the data that goes in the models, but first and foremost, from where I sit as CEO, is who is using AI in the organization, and how do we track that, and how do we understand that, and what are the approval metrics by that? And then to Jitendra's point, how do we do that in a way that's governed? And I think that is coming sooner than later. The EU has already introduced the EU AI Act. NIST has the NIST AI RMF framework that's out there. So being able to link your AI governance strategy of where it is to then the control set that we are following for AI, to then the policies that we have in our organization, to then the risks that AI poses, right? What type of risks are we going to take on with this, specifically cyber? And then really what we haven't talked about at all is AI with third-party use. Every company right now is really an outsourcer of information to other third parties that they use. How are those third parties using AI? And we could have the best AI controls, the best AI governance, the best AI policies within our own internal organization. But if we're shipping our data over to, or customers' data over to the third-party vendors that we use to just drive efficiencies in our business, how are they doing? What are they doing with that, right? And just asking simple questions. SIG already has this built into the SIG Lite framework of just generative AI questions that you have to ask about your third party. So it's capturing all that information too, to me, to help make strategic-based decisions so we can move fast with AI, but we can also protect ourselves.
Roy, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'm going to take this in a somewhat different direction. I agree with all the things that have been said. But I come from a company that does a lot of engineering, and one of the things you really focus on in engineering is making sure you've actually started by defining the problem you're solving. And once you have actually defined that problem, which I find often is not done well, then you actually know what kind of data you're going to need for this. You understand who's going to be affected by this system. Is it your customers? Is it your employees? Is it the general public? You're able to start talking about things like risk matrices. How autonomous is this system, and what level of effect can it have on people? Different levels of that mean that you need to put a lot more kinds of care into that. You need to look at both what the expected usage of your system is, but it's also really important to look at unintended uses. William Gibson, the science fiction writer, had a wonderful quote: "The street finds its own uses for technology." We invent these systems, we expect them to be used in a certain way, and then we find out that people are using them in different ways. And one of the things that can help you with that is make sure there's a diverse set of people who are involved in all parts of what you're doing. So they can look at something that you've gotten perhaps a little tunnel vision on and say, well, wait a minute, what if this happens? What if it happens like this? I've often partnered with the legal and the regulatory people and the quality people. They can be enormously helpful in helping you understand what the risks are in things you're doing, or what kind of facets you need to look at that you may not see. So I'd suggest that that's one of the things, I'm going to keep talking about core issues. I think it's very important, especially in a fast moving area like this, that we really focus on some of those kinds of fundamentals.
Stephen, anything that we're missing here? We talked about a lot of things. Anything to wrap up this question?
So I'll keep it brief and build on what Roy was talking about with the diverse perspective. I found companies that I work with that are the most successful in implementations of actually getting AI models into production, which is a huge challenge, are those that actually implement cross-functional teams across security, privacy, the data teams, the technology teams, and the business themselves that are defining the business problems, to make sure that the AI is actually executing what it was defined for, to Roy's point exactly, right? I also find that transparency in education has to be a part of that framework. So I think data literacy is becoming a top topic within this industry, and something that we have to make sure is part of that governance framework.
All right, I think that sets us up pretty well for the next set of questions. And I think that, Jitendra, you listed a lot of the topics we're going to talk about. So I want to start off with the compliance topic, with the question around compliance. We are starting to see, Matt, as you mentioned, government entities as well as national standards bodies are starting to pass legislation around artificial intelligence. EU had to race to be the first, and now I think recently Colorado is now the first state to pass an AI law. And then we also have to consider the fact that there are a lot of privacy laws out there that need to be considered when we're dealing with the potential for personal information being used in AI. So with all of those existing privacy laws, as well as what is surely going to be a wave of new AI laws, how can organizations ensure that their AI systems are in compliance? And I guess the other question that I have is, because these laws are all going to be sure to overlap in some way and have some differences, are there any universal principles that we can adopt, that organizations can adopt, to make compliance more agile across different jurisdictions? And Matt, I'm going to start with you on this, since that seems like the right fit.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is this has been done for a long time in GRC, right? You think about the banking industry, you think about the healthcare industry, there's rules, regulations, standards, and we have a really clear point of view on how you take those, how you link those to your control sets, whether those are policies or procedures or system controls within an organization. So I think it's just a government entity and body. And like I said, the UK was the first to do this, to establish what is that framework set that's out there that we will establish. I think there's some things that they're going to be pretty clear in these guidelines, though. One is just risk classification within AI and taking that risk-based approach. Two is transparency. And I think this is probably the biggest one. What are the guidelines on if I'm modifying a photo or a video on this? And we're already seeing this, right? If you go to Instagram today and it's an AI generated image or video, it says right on there, AI generated. So you're going to have a government body regulator come out with what are those guidelines. And NIST RMF, I think, is a great one. That's one that our customers are using as kind of the baseline to implement off of. And then have a platform to help. What are the guidelines? What are we using? What are the policies? What are the system controls that we have in place with this? So, the good news is, I think a lot of industries have been doing this for a long time. So it's not going to be a huge leap internally for a lot of companies to get there being compliant around AI usage.
Roy, what are you seeing in the compliance area?
Yeah, I'd agree with Matt. I think that this document is a terrific document, so I'd really encourage people to find that document and read it. I think you also need to look at the EU regulations. And again, going back to what Stephen said, I was very happy to partner with the legal, the regulatory, and the quality people, because it's their job to look at these kinds of things, especially as it affects your particular industry. So they can look at this and tell you some of those kinds of things. I also would say, make sure if you're doing compliance, you're doing the training. What I often see is companies have compliance rules, but they don't do enough training on that stuff. And then when things fall through the crack, they're not quite sure why that happened. Again, at Medtronic, we set up those core principles that everything needed to revolve around. So beneficial use, safety and effectiveness, fairness and non-discrimination, quality and accountability, privacy and security and transparency. I think if you start with those high-level guidelines and you let them filter through the different things you're doing, even as everything changes around you, you have that compass to help you figure out where to go.
Stephen, I'll come back to you. Anything?
Yeah, so a couple things, right? I think sometimes we conflate regulations with frameworks. And one of the things that I talk to customers a lot about is a regulatory body like the EU AI Act is quite frankly different than the NIST AI RMF framework, right? If you follow the NIST AI RMF framework, then you can potentially utilize that framework to comply with the regulations, right? So I think one thing is education around the differentiation between regulatory compliance and things that you have to do from a legal perspective, and then frameworks that you follow in order to do that. I think the second thing is, what are some of the core principles? it's discovery and classification of data is just core, right? And now, of course, maybe I'm biased because I'm from Big ID and that's the stuff that we do. But if you don't know what you're having, you don't classify it, then how do you actually manage that data? And I think with AI, what we're seeing a lot is, especially on the unstructured side, there's been this black hole of data on unstructured that people have just ignored. And now with AI, people all of a sudden discovering, when you talk about things like co-pilots, that's just opening up a whole new world of data that nobody ever paid attention to. So, some basic foundational stuff is stuff that we should have been doing 20, 30 years ago. Discover your data, classify your data, set responsibilities of that data.
Okay. Jitendra, how do you feel about this?
Most of the strategies that all my esteemed panelists discussed is exactly what you need. If I just take a different approach to it, I think in terms of priority, where do you start? And most of us have been thinking about data governance. We have GRC in place. Companies that are coming up new, that are building new solutions, I would suggest them to go revisit your data governance framework. Make sure that there are no loopholes. Make sure that these framework that you have put in place to have very effective data governance across your company can stand the test of the new sets of compliance and regulation that is coming. Also, I would say just make sure that you go back and implement a secure development lifecycle. I think this is what we have seen a lot these days. Privacy by design principles is very, very common. So just I think in terms of priority, that's my number one. Just go back and revisit the effectiveness of your data governance framework. Number two is just make sure that you continuously train your engineering and your product management teams, so they are always thinking about data minimization. These are very data hungry systems. So if you do not have effective data governance framework, you are setting up yourself for potential uncompliance or miscompliance.
Gaurav, anything left to say on this, or is it all been covered?
A lot of this has already been covered, but I'll build on Jitendra's point. We think that AI models really are compressed data. And instead of SQL, you actually query them using natural language, right? And then you ask them to remix things that the AI models already know. And whatever, all the data that has gone inside it can come out in multiple different ways. So data governance and all the things that we've learned from data governance frameworks can really be applied very well to AI governance as well. Things like whatever is the most strictest regulation for a particular area, those are the ones to apply to. And then that makes sure that all the different regulations that are coming out, you are good with that anyway. Then I completely agree with Roy on the principles. Those need to be established by each organization. Then government needs to get into it as well for two kinds of organizations. One, for all the frontier model building companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and then others. But then for regular enterprises who are using those models, what those mean, those need to be defined very, very clearly as well. And I think EU AI Act has done that really, really well.
And so we'll move on, but I want to say one thing that if it wasn't clear in some of the answers, I think that the compliance piece and these other components we're talking about really indicate that this is a cross-functional responsibility. This is not a data governance alone responsibility. There are many components and many stakeholders in your organization that need to have some say in what's happening. All right, let's move on to one of the other big issues, which is ethics. And it's an issue that organizations absolutely need to think about. Are the tools fair and not biased? Does the organization have accountability for its AI systems, and how does it demonstrate that accountability? How is personal information used, if at all, in creating these tools? Sometimes organizations, when you're rushing to be first on the market, some of these ethical issues sort of tend to fade into the background in the name of innovation and moving forward. So what are some of the best ways that companies can effectively balance that innovation with ethical considerations? Are there any practices that can be put in place to look at ethical risk and manage it appropriately? I'm going to start with Roy this time.
Okay. Well, again, coming from a medical company, one of the things we always talked about was the medical risk matrix. So, if you think about a two-dimensional chart, on one axis, you've got the degree of autonomy of the system. Okay, is it just giving you information like here's the temperature 15 seconds ago? Is it giving you recommendations? or is it actually taking an action based on its, what it's come up with? And then the other axis is, what's the degree of effect? Is it, again, just informational? It doesn't change anything. Is it something where somebody's going to take that advice and do something? Is it something where it might overdose a patient if it gives the wrong answer? So depending on where you fall on a kind of grid like that, it tells you the kind of risk you've got to take into effect. And these days, I'm also thinking about speed. There's a sort of third axis of, if this is wrong, how quickly can I react to what what's going to happen with this? We see this with talk about autonomous weapons, right? If they make a wrong decision, you don't really have a lot of time to tell it not to do something. I think it's also something that has to come from a management point of view. Management has to actually reward people who spend time doing the ethical thing rather than the people who, or only the people who do things as quickly as possible. We don't always see that, but that kind of leadership has to come from the top down. I think, you have to, again, emphasize those core values and make sure that your training and people's thought processes really take those into account. I think you also want to do some of the things that we've done traditionally. There's a really good article called The Mirror in the Machine on Medium by Brandon Cosley, where he took generative AI and he gave it resumes and he made minor variations in the inputs to the resumes just to see the different effect that would have on the results that came out of that system. That's something we've been doing for a long time with things like Lime and SHAP analysis. I think it's that kind of thing we also have to do here to see if there are unintended biases that are coming into these systems that we just might not otherwise see.
Stephen, how do you feel about that? What are you seeing in the area of ethics?
Yeah, so I like to combine ethics and risk, because I think a lot of people translate ethics as if they're following regulations, then they're fine, right? But I think there's internal discussions that you need to determine how are you going to use your customer data and what is your ethic risk tolerance level, right? Because you have to balance the speed of innovation with how likely are you going to go on that scale of being fully ethical or not, right? And there has to be open discussions around that. I think once you have that discussion, then determine what models actually are fine from an ethical standpoint and allow those to go into production, right? Highlight those that are strictly ones that you do not want to put in production, right? And then have a review committee review those ones that are kind of in the gray area. I think all too often with data, we don't separate the stuff that is totally safe, totally ethical, and put that aside and just give access to people and let them go do what they need to do, versus just locking everything down and having these overbearing processes. So ethical risk tolerance internally, understand what that is, evaluate your models. Does it meet the ethical requirements or not? Educate people around risk tolerance, ethical tolerance versus regulations, because they're very different things in my mind. Thank you.
Jitendra, how about you?
So as many of us understand, AI development requires a layered approach. You need a platform, then you need an application, and then you need users. And underneath the platform, you need data sources. So when our customers come to us and say they're building a risk model, they're building a fraud model, they're building a credit model, and they would love to leverage artificial intelligence to improve the accuracy and effectiveness of these models, we suggest them that, have you thought about guardrails? What kind of guardrails would you put so that not only you get effectiveness out of your system, but you reduce biases and make sure that the system is extremely ethical? And define what ethics means to you. Ethics means very different things to different, as other panelists mentioned. In case of healthcare, it means something different. In finance, it means something different. So just understand the guardrails you want to put in places. And we have recommended that put guardrails in layers. Like when it comes to data platform, put guardrails so that you need extreme diversity in the sources you will bring in to train your models. When you think about applications, same set of guardrails are required, that you have some checks and balances in place to assess the accuracy and biases that may be present in the decisions applications are announcing. And then I think in our case, what we recommend is that make sure that you're continuously assessing the system. Every layer of the system needs to be assessed separately. The data sources, the decisions that the system's are making, the users that are using it. Again, make sure that you have a very diverse set of users, and you don't always have canned set of scripts, because when these models go into real world, you do not know how they will be tested and played with. So just have as much diversity across all layers in your AI stack. That will help you put one very extreme set of guardrails across all layers in the system.
I like that term. Gaurav, are you seeing in your area the same use of the guardrails that Jitender's talking about? Is that something that resonates with you?
Absolutely. Guardrails are required to align these powerful systems to human preferences. And I think what gets measured gets managed. And in terms of ethics, I think we should look at it that way. Starting with what are the key use cases for which these models that we are creating can be used, and what kind of biases that can come in because within those use cases. And it starts with looking at the data and making sure that that data is diverse enough, does not contain those biases, and making sure that doing everything within the data so that before it even reaches the AI model, these things are removed and corrected. But because of because we are all humans, these biases get can creep in within the data without us knowing as well. And I think that's where we need to keep testing these AI models for those things automatically, continuously, as new changes happen to training data, as new changes happen to AI models. We need to keep measuring it and then correcting it by those guardrails, by providing the human alignment data sets to it as well.
Matt, I'll give you the last word on this.
Yeah, I agree with what's been said here. I'll use a little data to back it up, which is Deloitte did a study last year on the state of ethics and trust in technology. And when asked about AI and the concerns around AI, it was privacy and ethics. That was the number one by far. They also asked a question around what to do to combat this. And they said, if senior leadership buys into the ethical standards and promote those within an organization, over 90% adoption within an organization. And I truly believe that. It starts at the top of what are the ethical standards that an organization has and the privacy standards. And if those are promoted by executive level people, the executives aren't the ones writing the code on the day-to-day, but they're the ones that need to push down what is our stance, what is our beliefs, what are our values on these things within an organization, right? And I really think it's around, we have to do this because we have to move fast and innovate, but not at the, in my opinion, not at the expense of customers and their data and their privacy around this. So I think data privacy is a huge one. And I also think the AI bias is real, and that's a big problem too, right? So how do you fight that within the data? And that's hard. And to me, you fight that by hiring a very diverse team that works on these things, right? We can't have the same type of people that are working on these. How do we hire a diverse team and have a diverse candidate pool that is working on these AI initiatives that can hopefully help fight some of the bias that we are seeing in these models and in the data that's going into these models?
All right, let's talk about one of the other topics that got mentioned earlier. For a lot of people out there, a lot of organizations, but users of AI in general, there is still some uncertainty about generative AI, AI in general. Am I talking to a real person or a chat bot? Are users being told when AI might be involved in a business process, like mentioned about Instagram? So part of a good AI governance program is going to be transparency. My question is, how do you build trust among users and stakeholders regarding AI systems so they're not seeing AI as just this mysterious black box? How important is transparency in gaining trust? And I guess, what does transparency look like? Stephen, I'll give you first shot.
Yeah, I think there's a balance here, right? You want to be as transparent as possible, but you also can't give away your competitive differentiation. So I think there's a couple things to talk about here. One is, do not write a privacy policy to your consumers or your customers that is 55 pages long in legalese, right? You have to put it in English language so people can understand and actually read it. And it's not 55 pages. We all tend to click on those apps and those privacy things because we just don't want to go through the whole process. So make it easy to understand, be transparent, balance your competitive advantage versus what you can actually share. I think the other critical component is really around, there's a business perspective here and there's a technical perspective here, right? How is the model built? What data is utilized? But then what is the outcome that was expected from the business? So we all see certain companies out there will utilize privacy and security as a differentiator and have billboards and so forth around those types of things. So how do you actually relate to your customer? bring your customer into the mix, right? This is what we intend on doing. This is what we think we want to utilize. What are your thoughts and efforts? Because all too often we have people in a room that think they know what their customers want, but they actually don't, right? So ask your customers and bring them into that process. So I think from transparency perspective, be as transparent as possible, protect obviously competitive advantage, bring your customers into the mix.
Jitendra, you had mentioned transparency early on in the discussion. What does transparency look like to you?
I think it's all about leaning in with transparency to make sure that all the fear and misconceptions that are out there about AI, they get diminished as much as possible. So just building upon to what Stephen said earlier, a lot of companies, I've worked with very large companies, including Meta and Netflix, and they do a very good job of making everything accessible. But as Stephen mentioned, that it's accessible, but is it comprehensible? So I think coming from machine learning background, explainability of these systems is a very critical component in building trust. And explainability, as Stephen mentioned, goes two ways. One is just help us understand what data has been used, and then help us understand how the decision-making process works in the system. And if you just lean in on those two dimensions, I think those are essential for building user trust and most important, acceptance. If I trust the system, I will use it, I'll champion it. If I do have any skepticism around it, I will not use it, and I'll most likely, using word of mouth, I'll say this does not work and I cannot trust it.
Gaurav, how do you feel about that? That seems like a good model for most organizations to follow.
Absolutely. Hiding behind a 50-page document is no longer the right thing to do. I think most people will then have AI read that model and then see where are the problems and then highlight them for them. So it does not. What really will establish trust with end users is simple ways in which you define your principles. These are the ways in which we want you to use AI. These are our principles. We don't use your metadata and data for training. We don't want these kind of use cases to be used for AI. And once these principles are defined and followed properly, I think that sets a good direction for the organization. And after that, it's all about making sure that if there are any deviations from those principles, those are quickly handled by the organization through AI governance councils that can be set up. I think those have really helped us at Informatica as we released Clear GPT, which allows users to use natural language for data management. Many questions were around trust and transparency. So having a site where people can go and look at our principles, and every time there are questions that arise, getting to them as quickly as possible.
Love the use of information governance councils. That's very, again, I'm a big champion of the cross-functional approach. Matt, your thoughts on transparency?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's paramount, to building trust within AI, whether that's internal users, whether that's internal stakeholders, or whether that's your customer. Transparency within AI is paramount, and it's all over the news today. I think there's a couple of core strategies that you can implement. First is a lot of the customers that we still work with, like you're talking about AI councils, that's perfect. That's what you need to do. But I think a lot of the customers that we work with, big and small, don't have that, right? They don't have a central place of like, hey, where is AI blossoming in my organization? And it's kind of the wild, wild west. So first and foremost, it's just getting some way to track where is AI being used in our organization. And then to the points that were made on the call here, what is our stance on it? What are our policies? What are controls do we want to put in place? And does our employees know about them? Have they attested to these policies that we have in place? And then I spoke about this before, but I think it is important. We're talking about AI governance within our organization, but so many organizations today ship their data off to third-party providers. How are those third-party providers? What are they doing from an AI perspective, right? How are they managing AI within your organization? The second that you take customer data from yourself and give it to a third party to do something with, to drive efficiencies in what you do, you, in my opinion, are on the hook for that customer data. So making sure that you understand how third-party organizations are going to use AI with data that you transfer over there. And then we've talked about this, right? It's how do you build a holistic and fair, just overall arching approach to AI governance within your organization and have that cross-functional oversight from not just the product teams that are building it, but the privacy teams, the legal teams, the audit teams, the risk teams, right? What is the risk appetite that we have in the organization? But, it is truly paramount, I think, that organizations build in these policies, because ultimately this is the bedrock upon which they can point to gain trust with their internal and external stakeholders.
Roy, we all agree, I think, here that transparency is a must-have, but I would guess that in healthcare, transparency is just table stakes. I mean, that goes without saying, I would think.
It does. Let me give one example of what not to do. If people want to Google's duplex demonstration, where they had a computer machine that had a very human voice make calls on behalf of somebody to businesses and make reservations for them without the people on the other side knowing that they were talking to a machine. Google thought this was a truly wonderful thing. It completely freaked people out. And in addition to that, when it made a call on your behalf, you couldn't hear the conversation or get a transcript of it. So if you want to talk about what not to do, that was really a good example. Just some basic principles. Make sure your users know when an AI system is being used. Make sure they can get information on how it's been tested. Make sure you're explicit on how is it expected to be used, what kind of limitations it has, and where it shouldn't be used. Okay, some of the work that's going on these days, Google is doing things like AI model cards and data cards. Think of those as nutrition labels for AI. So you are giving an example of a way to say in a very clear way to non-technical users, here's what this is, here's what it does, here's how we did it, here's what it uses. Here are any, ifs and buts that you need to know about this system. And I think having things like that people can understand is a great way to start on transparency.
All right, we are headed to our last couple of questions here. We've sort of defined what we think the world should look like in terms of AI governance. Now I want to kind of think about what it's like now and what we want it to look like. So maybe my first question is, we know what we want it to look like. Is it happening now? What are you seeing out there right now in terms of AI governance? Are there any examples where organizations are successfully implementing some of these practices, even partially, that are enhancing privacy and maintaining compliance and gaining trust with everybody? And are there lessons that could be learned from this? What are you seeing happening right now out in the world? And we are going to start this one with Jitendra.
I would use an example that we are in the final stages of launching. As I mentioned earlier, we are a data platform company. On our platform, companies bring data, they do data modeling, and then after data modeling, data transformation, then they start building their application. As I also mentioned earlier, that there are guardrails that they think about in every step of their application architecture. So one of the Gen AI application we have launched is which is basically help users do data modeling. Now, data modeling is a engineering concept. You bring in data, you understand what are the types of the data, how you transform data, and what we have seen is that when we train our model, what we have done is we never mix the data from two different users, two different companies. So that's one example of putting some guardrails around, making sure that as the data modeling system becomes more and more effective, it is becoming better by understanding the data coming from a single source. And it's not attempting to learn the data that came from another customer. So that's basically building a multi-tenant solution to explain to our users is that we will not use your data to train our models. We have seen that kind of a pledge from other companies as well. Similar set of principles we have put in place to make sure that the systems we're launching are highly transparent, and we have these guardrails in place that the data is not getting commingled. So that's one very simple use case we have put in front of our users.
Gaurav, how about you? What are you seeing out there?
The one example I'll talk about is this healthcare organization that we work with, and it builds on what Matt and Roy were talking about wild west of AI models and then healthcare companies dealing with it. Hugging Face has 700,000 models right now, and once ChatGPT came out in November, of 2022, everybody wanted to use AI models for whatever use case that they would think that generative AI was great for, and that increased model proliferation within that organization. Everybody was spooked because when you're setting up guardrails and you're setting up data governance policies, you're setting it for the data that's going in your models. You can't do that for open source models. Open source models could have been trained with anything, right? Internet data and so on. So you're building on top of that. So the way they did it is they talked about which of these models are certified for use by that AI governance council of that particular organization. Those were put on AI model marketplace that people could search. That was, of course, that was Informatica's marketplace, and the model cards were built on top of it so that people could discover those models, what use cases they were good for. And every time somebody wanted to bring a new model into the organization, they would have to fill out a form, what use cases, and so on. And it went through review process before it got certified for use. I think that's a great example of how to govern AI model usage within an organization.
Matt, I would assume that running a GRC platform that you at least are seeing some of your customers out there who are getting started on this, whether they're doing it all the way that we've been talking about it. But what are you seeing? Is that the case?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think it's honestly the application from our marketplace that is getting utilized the most right now and downloaded the most right now by our customers is our AI governance application. And just an example of that, working with a very large retailer who beforehand, it was like I was talking about, it was the Wild West. It was like Jitendra was talking about, just a ton of models. Everyone wanted to use OpenAI within the organization. They established an AI council, which we've talked about here, that was cross-functionally, which I think is really the bedrock and where you got to start. But then using the platform and the application to really understand where AI is utilized within organizations, what types of models they want to utilize, are those models approved within the organization, and what is the workflow and approval process around that? And then once they have that, okay, well, and they decided to use the NIST RMF framework, right? And then build their policies off of that framework. So it ties very nicely together, right? I think that the great thing about, AI governance is governance within organizations has been happening for a very long time within the GRC market and landscape. We're just now tying this to a very specific subset of governance, which is AI within an organization. But luckily we're uniquely qualified to help, I think, a lot of organizations do that quickly. We're able to spin up different aspects of it. And it's not just about technology. It's about what we've been talking about here, really getting buy-in from the top of, hey, this is the ethics, this is the privacy, this is the standards that we're going to use within it, and having the people, right, that talk about what is our risk appetite for AI, what is our risk appetite for the privacy landscape that we want to have. The technology just helps really drive efficiencies and automation and making sure that we are complying with the different aspects of this at a large scale within organizations.
Roy, how about you? You're retired, but that doesn't mean you're not seeing things out there in the marketplace.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about, before I was retired, I worked in a very large multinational, multi-unit company. And so in a company like that, it's very hard to implement one standard. What we found was that each of those business units, which had often their own customers and their own products, had their own standards for how they were going to do things. We did try and make sure that they were aligned with these North Star, the AI Compass principles. We audited them against these kinds of things, but I will be honest, that's still a work in progress. And I would expect it's a work in progress for any really large company with lots of internal constituencies. We did try and make sure that, for example, when we had a system that was being used by a certain set of users and was going to give them recommendations, that they knew that at the end of the day, they had responsibility for making final decisions. So that was part of the governance process there, that here's the system will do this for you. The system will give you a recommendation of this sort. But in multiple cases, you're responsible for making the final decision on acting or not acting on the recommendations of the system and so on. So that's really all I can say at this point.
All right. Stephen, last words on this?
Yeah, sure. I think there's really two use cases I see a lot in the marketplace. One is turning on co-pilots, right, from the technology providers. and understanding how they can utilize that and increase efficiency. And the other is how to develop internal RAG operation systems, right, from an AI perspective on generative AI models. The customers that are doing a really good job are those that are all the things that we talked about today from an AI governance perspective, right? They start by understanding and knowing their data. They scan that and build a data catalog. They classify it. They understand the foundational model and the capabilities of it, and then what knowledge system they're going to put into that model to enrich it and make it their own, if you will. And then they have a review process, right? They also have an internal education system. So I think when people talk about adoption and getting these things into production, quite frankly, I think there's a low percentage out there, right? A lot of people are dabbling in this generative AI and AI, frankly. But to actually see customers put them into operational and see the efficiency gains, I have one customer tell me internally they've turned on a Copilot, 100% efficiency for some of the individuals that are writing code, doing simple things, writing emails, abstracts, meeting notes, things like that. Super important. But if you don't have that AI governance model in place, then you're going to get responses that you probably really don't want out there as a response. So I think those that are doing it well have been doing governance for quite a while and are just tweaking those governance models to meet the AI requirements.
All right, last question, and we don't have time for a full answer here. So this is a lightning round on the last question, but I think it's important because we need to know what are the challenges. So one challenge that you see facing organizations around AI governance, how should our audience get started on meeting those challenges? One apiece, 30 seconds. Gaurav, go.
I think the future is really bright. I think AI models are going to get really powerful, which is both a challenge and an opportunity. The challenge will be everybody will be using it. Opportunity is we can use these AI models for governing and automating governance as well. I think that would be really useful for checking for biases, checking for all the things that we talked about today.
Jitendra, biggest challenge?
Data sources, just accuracy of data that is used for training, garbage in, garbage out. To just focus on data sources.
Yep. Stephen.
Education on keeping up with technology and regulatory capabilities.
All right. Roy.
Taking whatever you're going to do and make it digestible. If you make these things too complicated or too long, people are going to find workarounds. They're not going to understand it. So I think the biggest challenge, especially with the heat that's going on here with all these things, is to make sure that what you set up is understandable, concise, and workable.
And Matt, final word.
Speed. This industry, this landscape is moving so fast. How do you keep up with that? And how do you keep up with it in a way? Because we got to do it. It's where the world's going. It's how do you innovate? But how do you keep up with it in a way that protects your customers and protects your intellectual property?
And with that, we are done. So I'd like to invite Jonathan back in to wrap this session up.
Excellent. Thank you, one and all, for that great discussion. It was enlightening to listen to it all for the past hour here. And as we wrap things up, I want to invite each of you to provide some self-promo for your blog, your LinkedIn profile, a podcast, Twitter account, whatever you'd like to plug, probably your company solution. The floor is yours. We'll go in reverse clockwise order. Stephen, kick us off.
Yep. So Big ID, we're a data discovery and classification company. If you haven't noticed, a lot of the foundational capabilities we talked about today is exactly what we do across security, privacy, and data. And we work with many very large scale companies trying to implement generative AI and AI. So please reach out to me if you want to find out more. Thanks for having me again. It was a lot of fun.
Excellent. Thank you. And next, let's go over to Roy.
Okay. So as I said, I'm retired, but I'm on LinkedIn. People should feel free to contact me. I love this stuff, this topic. I'm glad to talk to anybody who has interest in it.
Appreciate that. Over to Matt next.
Yeah, as I mentioned, LogicGate provides a holistic GRC solution to empower different folks in our cyber group, our risk group, our compliance group, our audit group, quick time to value, starting at a very entry-level, low maturity programs all the way up to enterprise grade solutions, driving automation through different GRC landscapes to help on that entire journey, soup to nuts.
Excellent. Thank you. Jitendra, how about you?
If you're using LinkedIn, Uber, DoorDash, Stripe, you are most likely using our platform. We power all real-time analytics in these companies. So just reach out, check out Apache Pinot, check out StarTree, which was built at LinkedIn, and then Uber. So thank you once again for having me here.
You're very welcome. Thanks for joining. Gaurav, where would you like to send the audience?
We at Informatica are focused on comprehensive data management, whether it's integration, quality, cataloging, governance, or master data management. We also believe that the most important thing to get your self AI ready is to get your data ready first. And then that's where Informatica can help.
Excellent. Thank you. And final word from our moderator, Tom.
Thanks, Jonathan. Contourl is the largest independent provider of strategic consulting services around AI governance, information governance, and privacy. There's a lot of organizations know how to get the technical things right, but they don't know how to build the structure, the process, the policy around it. We can help with that. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn anytime. I'm happy to talk.
Excellent.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for moderating. And thank you again, all for your time and expertise over the past hour. That will do it for this panel. But we certainly want to encourage you, if you'd like to dive deeper into enterprise technology, to visit our growing community, always on destination for all your technology needs and research, insightjam.com. We hope you can see you there. And also, if you're over there, tomorrow at noon, our exclusive panel discussion with Bob Eve, the Jam Session. We do this once a month, first Friday of every month. Tomorrow we have a few great guests on as well. You don't want to miss that at insightjam.com. Or we always want to encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@InsightJam. And if you're already watching on one of those platforms, stay tuned, because in just 1 hour at 2 p.m. Eastern, we have another live panel discussion, how AI can make your operations more people-centric. Thank you one and all again for your time and your attendance. We hope you have a great afternoon. We will see you back here for the next panel. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.